all of our grain intake or grain intake in the day should come from whole grains. So that's what the USDA recommends. So what is our grain intake? Servings of grain amounts to be about an ounce is a serving. So really 6 ounces per day, 3 of which should be whole grain. Now that's ounces before they're cooked. Okay, so think about an ounce of dry oatmeal or 3 ounces of dry oatmeal for breakfast. And then of course that expands. And so if we get 3 of those daily servings in whole grains, that's a good start to getting the nutritional benefits of whole grains. And it is a really inexpensive, eating whole grains is an inexpensive way to get really good fiber just from the whole grains now and good nutrients. Now, when I say fiber from the whole grains, it's important because the way that a grain is made up is that it has a hull, an outer coating. It has a germ, and it has a bran, and then it has something called an endosperm. Maybe you remember some of these from way back in botany class or something. But when we process flour into all-purpose flour, for instance, which is what many of our breads are made up of, we get what is called we get all-purpose flour, and what we get is only the endosperm. And the endosperm does not have any nutritional value. So what is discarded is the germ and the bran, where all the good stuff is and where the fiber is and so on. So you might as well be eating a spoonful of sugar as eating a spoonful of, or you might as well be eating a spoonful of sugar if you're eating some white flour, because it kind of reacts in your system the same way. It gets absorbed very quickly and it can really spike your blood sugar. But the fiber in the other parts of the grain that are included in the whole grain aspect of a meal, like oatmeal, slows down the digestion, and that's why you don't get the same blood sugar spikes. Now, if you're watching your carbs, however, you still don't want to be overly, you don't want to overdo those whole grains even, but you do get protein, you get B vitamins, lots of antioxidants and trace minerals. And those trace minerals include things like iron and zinc and copper and magnesium. We get them from other sources too, but these are a good source. And of course, this varies depending upon the grain that you're eating. And what I would say about this is that if you can work some more whole grains into your diet, you're going to just increase the opportunity to lower your risk for heart disease, lower your risk for type 2 diabetes, and some other inflammatory diseases that are out there. And that means, I guess, switching. I see Mary and I'm thinking, Mary's on a low carb diet. So she's really not eating a lot of these. She's getting her carbohydrates from vegetables and other things. But if you're getting your diet primarily, your 6 ounces primarily from white flour or grain that is not whole grain, then you have lots of room for making some improvement there and gaining more nutritional value. But we've been raised with that. We've been raised with Wonder Bread and donuts and all of those things. So let's look at some grains for breakfast. And I want to talk to you about grains that have gluten in them versus grains that don't have gluten, because many of us are gluten intolerant. In fact, there would be a doctor that I go to who would say, the doctor's practice actually says everyone's got a susceptibility to gluten. We can't digest it as a protein. And I was a little unhappy the other day to hear them say that even doing fermenting of grains doesn't help with that. So what can happen there is it can lead to gut impermeability, meaning that we get leaky gut, if you've heard of that, which can cause inflammation throughout our bodies. Now I'm going to check my cereal here. Looks like we're getting to a boiling place. And I'm going to put the lid on and turn that to a simmer for now. And put a timer on. So anyway, there are many people who say, well, then I don't want any gluten in my diet, so what do I do? And there are lots of products out there that are alternatives to wheat. So let's start with the things that are gluten, so you know what to avoid if you're trying to avoid, or just understand what includes gluten. So wheat and wheat berries, which is what wheat flour is made from, they are ground wheat berries. You can cook them as well into a cereal like we're doing with the buckwheat. Barley, another one. Rye. Of course, we get a lot of this in breads and things, and we can actually make sourdough. Rye flour makes a really great sourdough. Farina, spelt, these are all wheat type products. Kamut is a wheat, and so is farro. So even though they have all different names, they are basically wheats, except for barley and rye, but barley and rye also have gluten. So can I answer any questions about that for now? And then when it comes to grains for breakfast, no gluten, we have lots of options. This is the exciting thing. So if you've never eaten quinoa for breakfast, quinoa is a delicious alternative to oatmeal too. And quinoa is very high in protein. So if you've eaten quinoa, how many of you have eaten quinoa?
I have.
Yeah, lots of you have eaten quinoa. Has anybody eaten quinoa for breakfast?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
I have too.
All right. Can you say how you prepare it? Who was the second person that said I have two?
that was Alma, and I went to Whole Foods and they sold oatmeal and then they sold quinoa, and quinoa was just delicious. And then you could add, the fruit and whatever, like, it was a bar. And then they did away with it because they said, well, we can't tell exactly what all is contained in the quinoa and their new labeling requirements. So I stopped eating it.
Oh, I'm sorry
But it was
about
great.
that.
It was great.
Were they concerned that it had gluten in it, perhaps?
I think so.
Yeah, that can be often the case. So depending on where it's processed or even what field it's grown in, if it can get cross-contaminated. And I see that Georgette said she's had quinoa for breakfast. Georgette is in the lounge. Yeah, so I have to ask this question. Janice just started eating puffed quinoa. So can you tell us